Do you want to reduce your energy bills? Or maybe you want to use greener energy? Go solar and get a discount. Right now, Which members can get a 7.5% discount on solar panels and their installation if you use Heatable, a Which Trusted Trader approved service. You can also include a storage battery and EV charger, handy if you're looking at making the switch to an electric car. To make use of this exclusive offer, simply head to which.co.uk/solar-offer. That's which.co.uk/solar-offer before the 30th of September 2025. And if you're not already a Which member, you can grab a year's membership for 50% off the usual price. To do that, go to which.co.uk/podcast offer to get involved. Start your solar journey today. Go solar and get a discount with Which.
With your summer holidays right around the corner, can you be sure that your travel insurance actually covers you for any medical conditions? Welcome to Which Money. Hello, I'm Lucia Ariano, and to help us explore travel insurance in a bit more detail and reveal the providers that we recommend, we have Dean Sobers, the insurance expert here at Which. Hello, Dean.
Hiya.
Welcome back to the show. Now, the last 2 times we had you on the podcast, you told us car insurance was slightly coming down. Home insurance was climbing. Where does travel insurance fit in all of this?
So if we're talking about prices, like most of the other types of insurance that we've kind of covered, the premiums for travel insurance are sort of gradually going up, and they have been doing so for the past few years. Not at the same rate as the likes of home insurance. But that's sort of a similar trend.
And we're going to be talking today a lot about how medical conditions impact your premiums. Can you just introduce us to, how medical conditions do impact the amount that you might be charged?
To kind of explore that a little bit, we reached out to some comparison sites to find out how much people pay on average for their travel insurance, depending on whether or not they've declared any medical conditions. And we got different sets of sort of data back from them. But what they seemed to have in common was you had a kind of a rough doubling of the premium when you looked at what people who don't have conditions pay on average versus those that do. So Compare the Market, for example, gave us some data showing what people paid when they took out a single trip policy. And on average, what those customers were paying was if they didn't declare a medical condition, they would pay on average £16. They would pay on average £33. So it's roughly double, a little bit more than double. Go Compare shared with us some data about what people pay when they take out annual cover that lasts for the full year and covers multiple trips. And those with pre-existing conditions would tend to pay £90 on average, and those without would pay £40. So about £50 difference for an annual policy. Thing to bear in mind is that these are averages of probably millions of transactions. So depending on your medical condition, you might find that it costs you a lot more than that to get it added to the policy, or it might cost nothing at all to add it. It depends on the things like how stable the condition is, what type of condition it is, and how severe it is.
And before we keep going down that road, there are also a number of other things that can affect how much you pay, such as destination, length of travel. Can you give us a few examples?
So it's destination. Then there is the length of time that you're traveling. So especially if you're buying a single trip policy, if you're going away for a week, that's going to cost you less to insure than it would if you're going away for a month. The really big one is probably your age. So older people pay a lot more than younger people because statistically they tend to claim more and to make more severe claims. And then other things that can affect it would include what you're going to be doing. So if you're going away on an extreme sports holiday, that's probably going to increase the risk through the insurer's eyes, and it will probably cost you more than you would if you were just going to sun yourself on a beach or something somewhere. And then the other big one would be the pre-existing medical conditions.
coming back then to all of the medical stuff, there used to be what was called an EHIC. Now, this was replaced by the GHIC. Is that how we describe it? We say it. So can you just give us a little intro into what that is? I mean, it's not strictly an equivalent, is it?
Yeah, so the GHIC is a global health insurance card, and that was phased in to replace what we had before Brexit, which was the EHIC, which is the European Health Insurance Card. And they do pretty much the same thing in terms of their general purpose, which is they mean that if you have a card on you, it basically entitles you to healthcare at the same cost that a resident would pay in that country. So if it's a country where they've got free healthcare, then you would get it for free. Or if it costs a little bit more, then you basically wouldn't have to pay any more than that. It's obviously relevant to insurance because if you have that entitlement, then that means that you're not going to be billed if you have an accident abroad for the treatment, and therefore the insurer, you wouldn't have to put in a claim that's as big. You wouldn't have to put in as big a claim with the insurer as you would otherwise.
Is there ever an instance where you might get you might have a GHIC card and you might not want to get insurance? So
some people do travel relying on the GHIC, and instead of getting insurance. I guess the key thing to sort of bear in mind is that, it's probably two things. So the first would be that while having a GHIC will demonstrate that you're entitled to a local cost of care, which might be nothing. It doesn't cover all the sort of associated medical costs. So, for example, if you need to be flown home because you need to be treated at home, it's not going to cover the cost for that. It's not going to cover things like ambulances necessarily. It's basically just going to cover you for the treatment that you receive. So that's one thing that insurance will pick up for you, or a decent insurance policy will pick up for you. Then again, the second thing would be a sort of a broader thing, which is that while medical expenses is kind of like the heart of a travel insurance policy, there's all sorts of other stuff that it picks up. So, for example, if something happens that means that between booking the holiday and traveling, you're unable to go on the holiday, then if it's covered within that policy that you have, then it'll be able to pick up. You'll be able to get your booking costs back for that, and that's something that a health card isn't going to entitle you to. And
for anyone who might like to get a GHIC card, I mean, I think the EHIC used to be free. Is the GHIC as well? Yeah,
just the same as EHIC. The GHIC is free, and it lasts you for 5 years. And you only actually have to get one. If you've got an EHIC at the moment, you only have to get one when the EHIC expires. So until that point, your EHIC will continue to cover you in the same way that your GHIC will.
So well worth getting one, but also well worth getting insurance. So let's get back to insurance then. Now, you've already mentioned that it can cost you double if you declare pre-existing medical conditions.
Or more.
Yeah, well, shall we get into some actual examples then? Because I know you've written about them in a recent Which Money article. As
I kind of indicated earlier, while the average is double, there can be a huge range in the actual impact that that declaring a medical condition will have on the cost. So one thing that we did was in a recent article is we looked at a few cases of people that have pre-existing medical conditions that they live with, and we just ran some quotes with a selection of insurers, sort of large well-known insurers, to see what would happen before and after declaring. So the three cases were, we had someone with diabetes, which was very well controlled. We had someone else with epilepsy, and that was also pretty well controlled. And then we had someone who had bipolar and personality disorder, where they'd had a hospital admission within the past 5 years. So in the cases of the person with diabetes and epilepsy, it didn't have a huge effect on what they were paying. So the person who has diabetes, when they declared their diabetes, it would impact the premium by an average of 6%, and that was sort of £7. So it added a little bit, but it wasn't sort of locking them out of the market. With epilepsy, it was a bit more. It was 23%, so it'd bump up the premium by about a quarter. With the person with bipolar and personality disorder, the effect was, in terms of percentage, it would bump the premium up 715%, which so a sevenfold increase. And in pounds, this wound up being £368. So this would make, and we also saw with this case, there were a number of the insurers that we looked at were unwilling to either offer cover at all or unwilling to cover that condition.
So let's say that you might have a condition, might be that one or another one that's just really bumping up the price, rocketing high. That's quite a surprise to me, actually, how high, much higher that is. What advice would you give then? Are there particular providers that you'd recommend?
I can't recommend any particular providers with regards to getting a good price, because it can vary depending on things like how many medications you're taking to control it, when you were last in hospital for it, and all those sorts of things. What I can say is if you are in the position where you're finding it really difficult to get insurance because of your conditions, what we tend to recommend is, it's two things really. So one is trying a medical specialist insurer. As the name suggests, they are insurers that specialise in covering people's pre-existing medical conditions. These providers sometimes aren't as easy to find as other insurers because they tend not to appear on the main comparison sites. But where you can find those insurers is there are two directories. So one of the directories is on the Money Helper website, and the other directory is on the British Insurance Brokers Association website. And these are directories that have been, they're official. They've been endorsed by the Financial Conduct Authority. We've done research in the past asking people who have used those directories if they've found them helpful and if they've managed to get better prices through firms that are on them than firms that aren't on them. And most of the people that we surveyed, this was back in 2023, seemed to said that they were very useful for finding affordable prices. And then I guess the second piece of advice would be getting some help, and that would be, so we tend to point people towards the British Insurance Brokers Association, which has brokers on it that can kind of help you find specialist policies that you might not be able to find on the open market.
I suppose we probably should add that a lot of people are declaring having medical conditions, aren't they? It's not just, a small percentage of people we're talking about here. No,
it's most people. So basically insurers tend to work with organisations called medical screening companies that do all the work of asking you these questions about what kind of condition you've got, how it's being treated, how long you've had it, and all that sort of stuff. And we reached out to a couple of these companies. The two main players, they're called Protective and Verisk. And Verisk told us that back before the pandemic, so between 2016 and 2019, 56% of people on average would declare a pre-existing medical condition when they were buying insurance. But what they said is that after the pandemic, between 2022 and 2025, that figure's gone up to 82%, which is, it's a huge increase. And obviously, both of those figures are the majority of people.
Well, after a quick break, we'll be back to hear some of our Which Best Buys, the insurers that are doing particularly well in these areas.
Saving for retirement can feel daunting. The same goes for managing your money once you've stopped working. That's why we've created an 8-week newsletter series breaking down what you need to consider, both pre and post-retirement, into bite-sized chunks. If you sign up to our free retirement newsletters, for 8 weeks we'll send you an email full of expert guidance to help you take control of your retirement planning and give you the confidence to make smart decisions. We'll help you get to grips with your pension, teach you how to boost your income, and explain more about care options. It doesn't matter when you sign up either. Your 8 weeks of advice will start whenever you sign up. So what are you waiting for? Head to which.co.uk/retirement newsletters, all one word, to get up to speed on everything you need to know for retirement.
Right then. So, Dean, the which Best Buys in this area, these are the providers that we recommend, that you've done extensive research to find. Can you start us off?
Yeah, so we did a survey looking at 55 providers, and we assessed their products to see which ones we kind of rate as Best Buys. There were 12 providers that had these products, and these were Saga, Barclays, Holiday Safe, FlexiCover, Nationwide, Insure and Go, Insurance With, All Clear, Covered to Go, Columbus Direct, Co-op, and Santander. And you can find out much more about the products that got the Best Buy badge and why they got it on the website.
Yes, and we'll pop a link to that in the description of today's show. Quite a few there, which is great to hear. I mean, I suppose myself included, many of our listeners, when they get in travel insurance, they might first go to a comparison site, as we've talked about. How do you know that your condition is definitely covered? I mean, we might have gone through a number of questions and told them, all the details that they've asked for. Can you be really sure that your condition is covered then? If
you haven't discussed it with the insurer that you've got the condition and what the situation is with it, then assume that it's not covered. Because pretty much all policies will automatically exclude any condition that they haven't explicitly consented to cover. So this can come up, for example, if you're with a bank, for example, and you've kind of got the insurance automatically. You kind of need to be proactive in contacting them and going through a medical screening process in order to have your conditions added. With most insurance sort of buying journeys, you will be asked if you've got medical conditions, and then if you say yes, you'll be kind of walked through a series of questions about it. Then, if you've gone through that process and you've addressed all the questions put to you in a forthcoming and kind of accurate way, then you should be covered for the condition. If some of the questions don't seem to capture parts of your circumstances that you actually think are important, then it's always a good idea to just pick up the phone and contact the insurer and just get them to either just take into account if you think there's information that they should be aware of, or just to give you some confirmation.
And something that always catches me out, I'm very guilty of this, is not getting travel insurance until I'm at the airport. I know that's a real big no-no, but I have a question for you, and it's when should you get the cover? Is it really, as soon as you're booking?
So if you get it at the airport, it's better than not getting it at all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
the reason that we always kind of advise people to have their insurance in place at the time they book their holiday is because if you don't do that, then you're not going to benefit from cancellation cover. So it's covering that period between booking the holiday when you've handed over your deposits, you've made your bookings, you've organised things. There's always a chance that something could happen that means that you have to change your plans, and that money that you've paid, you won't necessarily be able to recoup. And that's what the cancellation cover is there for. And it's one of the most common reasons that people do claim.
That's very true. And I suppose any other bits of advice that you can think of, and one that comes to my mind is, When you're booking and you see the figures come up for how much you might be covered for, it could be, medical costs for 50 million. Like some of these figures just seem really kind of hard to get your head around. How much do we actually need to be covered for?
It's a really tricky question, actually, because speaking kind of, completely sort of frankly about it, the claims that are so you'll have some insurers that have medical expenses cover of unlimited or medical expenses cover of like 20 million. Now the odds that you'll actually need to make a claim for something in the tens of millions is very unlikely. It's minuscule, but it's also a medical expenses type of cost is kind of an open-ended cost. You don't know what could, you think in the most catastrophic way. You don't know what could happen to you, or how expensive treatment could be, or how expensive medical needs could be in terms of transportation, in terms of ambulance costs, or all those sorts of things. So it could come to to a considerable amount of money, and you do hear from insurers about claims in sorts of hundreds of thousands. So it's a lot of money, probably more than most people could afford at a pinch. We generally recommend about 5 million as a kind of a minimum. And that's not because we think it's likely that people are going to need to make claims of 5 million, but it's we just think that tends to be that there aren't many policies that we've kind of looked at that have cover sort of below that. So if there is something that is kind of below that, it kind of opens questions about, okay, well, what else might the policy be missing as well?
And are there any other, because I know you dive so deep into travel insurance and all other areas of insurance, but are there any other niches that spring to mind when you're giving advice on how to choose the right one for you?
I guess a big one is, and we've kind of gone over this a little bit, is the specifics of cancellation cover. Just because there are so many different kinds of scenario that could happen that would lead to you having to cancel your holiday, and there tend to be lots and lots of different exclusions that might not be obvious that could mean that you wouldn't be able to make a claim that you thought you would be. So for example, cancellation might be, you might be able to make a cancellation claim under more or less any reason, in any circumstance where it wasn't your fault that you couldn't travel. Except, and then if you go through to the general exclusions, you'll see things like war, pandemic, civil unrest, terrorism, all those sorts of things.
Sometimes weather is on there.
Sometimes, natural catastrophe, it might be something that isn't covered, or you have to pay extra to add it in. And all these things tend to be, they're not particularly obvious. You kind of have to be looking for them. So I think that's kind of a big one. Then I guess also things like protection of your luggage. So one thing that can kind of come up is you might see a policy that will say it's got, let's say, £5,000 cover for your belongings, which sounds great. It's going to suit most people's needs. But then there might be there can be limitations within that. So, for example, for valuables, which can include things like your gadgets, there might only be a few £100s in there, which probably isn't going to cover you if you've got like an expensive laptop, or if you've got some jewelry or something like that. So you kind of need to do some extra digging, or you might need to add on like gadget cover or something like that.
And I suppose it also might be worth adding that you could also check if you're covered elsewhere, like you mentioned there with gadget insurance. If your phone is covered in another way.
Yeah, and actually the sort of gadget part of your policy is a really good sort of example of that, because you might actually have cover in place for some of these things in other types of insurance. So you might have gadget cover by itself, or you might have your home insurance might be covering it through the personal possessions cover. It's about finding the level of cover in your travel insurance, not just that is going to be suitably comprehensive to cover everything, but is also not going to be, like you're paying through the nose for cover that you're already paying for other kinds of insurance.
Well, it's been great to have you on the show, Dean. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Which, the UK's consumer champion. You can find plenty more advice about what we discussed today in the show notes. There you'll also find a link to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, an offer exclusively available to you, our podcast listeners. Joining Which will not only give you access to our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice, and every issue of Which magazine across the year, but you'll also be helping us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you'll be notified whenever we release a new episode of Which Money, Which Shorts, or any other podcast that we make for you. And if you want to get in touch with us, then follow us on social media at Which UK or drop us an email to podcast@which.co.uk. See you next time.
If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.